Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Get Stimulated second event, Imposter Syndrome, How to Conquer the Feeling of Self-Doubt. That's going to be led by Dr. Ceymone Dyce. I am co-owner and co-founder Shakayla Nunez, and my co-founder and co-owner is Brittany Bush. Britt, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Just nice to see everybody's smiling faces.
The mission of Let's Get Stimulated is dedicated to providing financial assistance to high school and undergraduate minority students wishing to pursue or pursuing a degree in science, technology, engineering, and math. And Let's Get Stimulated has a vision to be a world-renowned program that promotes financial support and academic excellence to minority students seeking a continued education in science, technology, engineering, and math.
So now we will introduce one of our lovely board members, Ms. Annette Inti, to introduce our speaker of the evening.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm very honored to have the privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening. Her name, once again, is Dr. Ceymone Dyce. She's a clinical professor, supervisor, and mental health therapist, and her credentials include a PhD, an LGPC, and an NCC. She's a nationally certified counselor, and she also has her own blog page at yourweeklyfollowup.com. And quite a large following on Instagram with the handle Dr. Dyce.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, especially on a Thursday evening. So today I was invited to speak about imposter syndrome. So a little bit of my background, I am a clinical mental health therapist. So I think right now, especially also being a professor in graduate studies at the University of District of Columbia, imposter syndrome is definitely a theme that I see pretty salient in between my students and a lot of my clients. So I'm excited to kind of share and have a good conversation with you all this evening. I do have a presentation and I'm going to share my screen. Thumbs up if you guys can see that, okay? Yeah? Okay. All right, turn that down. Okay, so this evening we're gonna just talk a little bit about navigating imposter syndrome. I'm gonna provide basically a general overview of what imposter syndrome is. I know that this is somewhat of a mixed group, but primarily STEM students, graduate students, collegiate students, but really this information is pretty relevant to anyone experiencing any type of achievement or any type of milestone in life. So my goal today is ultimately to help you guys understand what exactly imposter syndrome is. I might interchange the acronym of IS with it, and then also how to kind of navigate that. So when we talk about the agenda today, I also want to talk a little bit about the effects of imposter syndrome on your mental health, and then also understanding a little bit of the factors that contribute to what imposter syndrome might be and what it might look like for you. So when we talk about the definition of imposter syndrome, ultimately, it's the feeling that you are not deserving of what it is that you have accomplished and what you have achieved. And it's also persistent. It's your inability to believe that your success is deserved, especially when we think about our work in academia, when we think about the work that we do in our clinical practice, it's really characterized by our inability to internalize the success that we have achieved. And we believe it's through external factors or luck, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But we just, for some reason, can't make it click that we were able to achieve this with our own individual set of skills. So when we talk about the symptoms of imposter syndrome, what does it look like? What is the presentation, when someone is experiencing it? A lot of times it's attributing your success to luck. So instead of, acknowledging the fact that you've studied really hard for this exam or this assessment, it's kind of like, oh, I just kind of lucked out that day, or I had really good questions. It's a consistent sort of discounting your success. Like I had mentioned before, feeling like a fraud. I think one of the bigger pieces is feeling that someone's going to find you out. I know that I experience that a lot in my conversations with colleagues and friends. Like, I can't believe I was promoted for this or picked up for this. Someone's going to find out that I actually know nothing. So it's really just feeling like your success is not due to your skills, and that your abilities have ultimately been overestimated by either you or someone else who has seen something in you that you just aren't really willing to accept as fact or true. Okay, so when we talk about imposter syndrome, there are different kind of subtypes that were created to kind of give you guys sort of like a quick and dirty understanding of, if I experience imposter syndrome, which type of imposter am I? So I thought this would be really good information for you guys to sort of identify with as sort of like one of those BuzzFeed kind of quizzes, right? If you were experiencing IS, which sort of title were you? So the 5 categories, there's one that's called being a perfectionist. So someone who's experiencing the imposter syndrome, but the subtype is the perfectionist. So that's someone that has set extremely high expectations for themselves. And even if they meet 99% of those goals, they're still going to feel like a failure because that 1% was still not met. The next type is called an expert. So this is someone who feels the need to know every single piece of information before they start a project, before they start any type of assignment, and always constantly looking for the best way to level up. How do I get the next training? How do I get the next degree? How do I get the next certification? Because if I know everything, then of course I won't feel like an imposter, right? Because I will have all of these letters behind my name and it would make sense. This type of category type is also someone who might be hesitant to ask questions because of course a question would indicate that I don't really know what's being asked of me or what the topic is. So that would be the expert type. The next is called a natural genius. So this is someone who struggles to work really hard. It is an extremely hard worker, but because they have to work really hard, they believe that I always have to work hard at this. Nothing ever really comes natural to me, so I'm never going to be good enough because I always have to work hard. So when things are used to coming easily, but then you kind of hit that little milestone when you have to put in extra effort, the natural genius tends to think that that's proof because you have to now work hard that you're an imposter and you probably shouldn't be where you are. The next subtype is called a soloist. And so that's someone who feels that they have to accomplish every single task on their own. Sometimes I'm guilty of that. And if they have to ask for help, that means that they are a failure or a fraud because obviously I'm a soloist and I should be able to do it myself. But we know that the best work is a lot of times work that is done when you're able to ask and work collaboratively. And then the last type of imposter syndrome sort of category type is the Superman, Superwoman complex, which is essentially someone who pushes themselves to work really, really hard and harder than any of those that are around them to prove that they are not imposters. So if you're in a group status, it's I've got to outwork the next person just to show that I am exerting my skills and abilities and that I have succeeded because I am better than the actual group. And so sometimes with this particular subtype, which is not necessarily the most pleasant to hear, folks might feel stressed when they feel like they're not accomplishing something, which ultimately impacts mental health. So now that we've kind of gone over the subtypes, next I want the next kind of topic that I wanted to broach with you guys is sort of the contributing factors to imposter syndrome. So a lot of times when we think about psychological phenomenons, we want to know, what caused it, who do we blame ultimately? And then, of course, we try to figure out if we know from a social science perspective, if we kind of know the root of why, then we could figure out and target a solution and ultimately impact an outcome. So I kind of, there's a lot of different, it depends on who you ask really, right? Different factors as to why we feel an imposter in our particular settings. But I really wanted to focus on 4 key factors or components of imposter syndrome. 1 being gender, 2 being race, 3 being familial dynamics, and 4 being systemic oppression. So when we talk about gender and race, in addition to imposter syndrome, research shows that imposter syndrome is the highest in minority groups. It's the highest in African Americans, especially African American students. And it's also, from a gender perspective, it's the highest in women reporting imposter syndrome in comparison to men. A lot of times women have more roles than men and are expected to equally excel at all. When we talk about familial influence and imposter syndrome and how does your family dynamic impact your feelings of being an imposter in different settings? I am personally a systemic therapist and also very cognitive, but I believe that, your family system is sort of like your first introduction to socialization, right? So your first friends are your cousins. Your first ability to understand healthy relationships are from your family unit. So a lot of the family influences impact how you define yourself, but also your feelings of being an imposter. So you learn through your family that being smart is key. You learn that being smart has power. You learn that certain achievements and different interests garner different feedback and responses from your family. You know how to learn praise through your family, and you also learn how to navigate in settings that are cohesive and productive to emotional growth and emotional responses. And you also know how to navigate when things are kind of rocky and unstable. Also, not to blame the parents, but parenting style definitely has an impact on feelings of being an imposter as well, especially when we think about the mother-child relationship, father-child relationships, and also the way that your parents or caregivers were able to instill rules, boundaries, limitations, and control. Studies have found that imposter syndrome feelings are highest when there are lack of parental care growing up. In addition, and that makes sense, obviously, because without those particular boundaries, you don't really know or have a baseline when you're doing well or when you're not doing well. So that actually matriculates down into when you're an adult. And then the last piece, systemic oppression, especially when talking or thinking about the academy. Life in academia is a lot of waiting, which leads to the feelings of, those thoughts start to creep in, those irrational thoughts like, do I belong here? Am I going to be successful? A lot of times working in academia or in any type of large institution, it's a lot of waiting for permission to do things, which ultimately impacts your level of mental health and those feelings of being an imposter. Especially scholars in marginalized groups definitely have a hard time with imposter syndrome in academia or institutionalized work-life experiences. Because ultimately the feelings of otherness, which in counseling is anything other than the normal, is prevalent in academia because the systems weren't actually built for people of color. So it makes sense that feeling out of place or feeling not successful can go hand in hand because of the system of how it was actually built. So when we talk about imposter syndrome and its impact on mental health, a lot of times it's which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Did the imposter syndrome come first, or did the anxiety and the depression come first? And so this chart is actually really helpful to kind of show the different aspects and the ways that the feelings of self-doubt can sort of navigate through sort of that central nervous system and how the brain works. And ultimately, imposter syndrome is pretty much hand in toe with the big two, depression and anxiety. I personally believe that imposter imposter syndrome is a risk factor for depression and anxiety, meaning that the feelings of imposter syndrome will then lead to your feelings of feeling anxious, feeling depressed, ultimately because when you are feeling like an imposter, that leads to a lot of burnout. A lot of times you are a workaholic, you are a very type A person, right? And so all of those things that lead to the feelings of doubt then make you an increased candidate for high anxiety, high anxiousness, and also the lows that we experience when you're experiencing depression, especially given depression being something where ultimately defined as not meeting an expectation that you thought you were going to meet. That reward component of not feeling like an imposter or feeling like you're connected is a disconnect. So that's what starts to contribute to that impact on your mental health. Okay, so how to deal. So if we're dealing with imposter syndrome, or you know someone who's dealing with imposter syndrome, you know, what are the best ways to like combat this? How do I meet this challenge? And you know, how am I able to sort of navigate this to a space where I can go back and become productive again? Because we know when we overthink and our thoughts are saturated with doubt, we're not able to produce the work that we're wanting to, or we're not able to relate to others in the way that we wish. So my top 3 recommendations are to 1, develop standards to help you succeed, 2, challenge your inner critic, and 3, listen to somebody else. So when we talk about developing standards to help you succeed, I definitely want you to ask yourself, you know, and one thing I always ask my students, and I teach field placement, so all clinical students that are dealing with, you know, different anxieties and worries about dealing with their patients for the first time and doing therapy for the first time. And I let them know, I asked them, I said, you know, do your thoughts add or subtract from what you're currently doing, right? And everything should have a plus or a minus sign on top of it. And if you're starting to notice that a lot of the things that you're thinking about, or a lot of things that you are sort of wrestling with, have more minus signs than plus signs, then it's time to sort of rearrange those thoughts and sort of navigate where that's coming from, and then how do you set yourself up to win from a more positive source and not one that's more critical or something that's detracting from your emotional well-being. That's really about altering the way that you think, especially because imposter syndrome is an irrational belief. It's not true. You don't really have any evidence that what you're thinking is true. So we really want to start to sort of slow that thinking down, that rapid heartbeat, that rapid thought, that voice inside that's kind of telling you something that you're not really seeing, and help you sort of move towards a space where new information can flow a little bit freely. You also want to value constructive feedback. Feedback that is constructive is good feedback, and it can also help you grow. It can help you move further along, and maybe help you with a blind spot so you won't have to feel so anxious moving forward. And also find your exceptions. Nothing is 100% all of the time, right? And you have to also remember who you are. Next, my suggestion would be to challenge your inner critic. So that's that internal dialogue that you have inside that tells you that you're not it, you're not going to be able to be successful, and you don't deserve what you have, and you didn't earn that success. You know, you've got to be able to put a leash on your demons, and you got to know what it eats, you got to know where it hides, and you got to give it a name. You've got to point it out, and you have to know what triggers it. You have to know that, you know, I need to tell my inner critic this so I can feel safe. So that way I won't spiral and believe that I am not going to be capable of doing that, because if I feel like I'm not going to be capable of doing this, then it's going to impact my productivity, and it's going to impact everything else that I have going on. I'm definitely an advocate of being very mindful about how your body is responding to stress and how your body is responding to doubt. So if you notice, for instance, like your heart starts to beat a little bit quicker when you start to think about something in particular, identify it, stop yourself, maybe write it down, and allow yourself the time to put space in between the negative thought and an opportunity for it to not consume you, to impact you. Also, I would recommend to listen to someone else, especially if you're only listening to yourself and your thoughts are very negative. all about the narrative work in mental health practice. And so narrative work is all about listening and rewriting the negative dialogue that we say to ourselves so we can reauthor it to something that's more empowering to help us be more productive. And that could be anything from listening to podcasts that are positive. I love a TED Talk in the morning to start my day. And then, of course, last but not least, it's a shameless plug, but a third party that's objective is always going to be a good idea, whether that's spiritual counseling, finding a mental health practitioner, or even doing group work and finding a group of folks that are also kind of dealing with and looking to move forward a lot of the things that you might be experiencing. So my closing thoughts, this quote I thought was pretty appropriate. It says, "The best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity." And it's pretty interesting because it's pretty much saying that those who believe that they can probably shouldn't, and then the vice versa. So it's just parting words that, hopefully that you guys are able to broaden your perspective on feeling like an imposter at times. I do want to say that, especially as young scholars, a lot of times we feel like we are just standing upon a lot of the shoulders of folks that came before us, and it's a lot of pressure. And sometimes feeling the anxiousness is not all bad. You can put it to use. So I would definitely recommend that. I would also recommend a lot of times when you're unable to process something within yourself, it might be helpful to help someone else process it as well. So kind of leaning on that group format, but also mentorship and advocacy is also really key, because ultimately, self-doubt can be something that's positive. It can provide us humility. It can help us relate to other people better. And it can also be something that just really helps propel you to start that self-audit, but also kind of keep you in line with the things that you want to do and your goals and objectives. But we just can't let it consume us to the point that we just become stagnant and stuck. So that is the end of my presentation. I am open to questions, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyce, for that amazing talk. We wanted to sincerely thank you with our own presentation to you. So definitely look out for something from us in the mail. This is all of her information down here, guys. And also we have a few before everyone else asks questions, and then we'll open the floor. So Shakayla, I'll give it to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyce. That was a lovely presentation. I just have a few questions before we start, questions from the audience. One is that you mentioned seeking a third party or someone to talk to for any type of objective advice. Are there any type of free resources such as counselors or therapists that individuals can speak with about anxiety or imposter syndrome?
Free. That's an interesting.
Or maybe I could rephrase it to say maybe for students who are on their parents' insurance, or maybe for some of us graduate students that are on insurance, will our insurance cover us to go and talk to a counselor or a therapist?
Yes, so I definitely am. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be biased as a therapist, but when you guys have your university insurance, you guys have your counseling and wellness centers. Those are at no cost. A lot of times in your counseling and wellness centers, they have a list of, depending if you have the university insurance or not, a list of community resources that will also accept your school insurance, your school health insurance. And if you are on your parents' HMO, you have an allotted amount of counseling sessions. Your copays might be different depending upon what your plans are, but you won't have to necessarily pay like the flat rate of it. You might have to pay like a $15 copay. But there's multiple avenues for which you guys can definitely seek a third-party consultation. I also know right now, especially given COVID-19, digital platforms like Talkspace and a lot of sort of like the cell phone module therapists that are available, just make sure that you're working with folks that are licensed, because obviously, these are your feelings and thoughts. But though run all types of different things as well. But I would definitely encourage you guys to go to your counseling and wellness center, especially because there's so many different practitioners. I know a lot of times, folks don't want to talk about their personal feelings with somebody that they might see on campus, but a lot of times you have outside external therapists that are working on your university campus that are there solely just to work with students. And the best way, if you're going to go through your health insurance, is really to call the phone number on the back, and literally ask the person on the other line to send you, and they will send you an emailed list of all mental health counselors that are in your network that accept your insurance. And that's the best way to go and pick through them. I will also kind of put into the chat a website, which is Psychology Today, because then the next step, once you kind of have that list, is to go on Psychology Today or get on Google and look at the bios of the therapists and see, you know what, I think I would want to sit across from this person and have them help me untangle a lot of my thoughts and help me alleviate some of the anxiousness that I'm feeling. I say that the mental health sector is not the best. It is sometimes very convoluted, and I always kind of give this example that finding a really good therapist is like finding a pair of shoes. Sometimes you've got to try one on before you're just like, don't really like that one, don't really like that one. Or sometimes the first time you try it on, you knock it out the park. So I will just say that if you do kind of run into someone that you're just kind of like not really jiving with, I would encourage you just to keep going until you do find someone that you feel like can provide you that objective feedback. Because once you are able to find a therapist that you really do like, it's unmatched, and it really is life-changing. And I say a third party that's objective because our friends and our family are not objective. They might say that they're objective, but they know you, and they know you, right? And so the therapist is there to learn you, but the therapist doesn't have skin in the game. The therapist is really just there to help you sort of untangle the webs that you're feeling. And I will also say to this, a lot of people ask, when is the time to go see a therapist? How will I know? And at my best sort of response is when things start to get really overwhelming and you're unable to make the decision for yourself, right? So when it starts to become the same kind of constant problem that you normally probably would have figured out by now, but now you're just like, you're stuck, that's the time to give somebody a call to just say, hey, I don't really know you, but listening to you, I think we should do that instead of this.
Thank you so much. And I know that we have a few students that are online, so I'll just give the audience an opportunity now to ask any questions. Just feel free to unmute yourself, and we can just take the next 1 to 2 minutes answering questions from the audience.
Also, if any of you guys are shy, you don't want to speak, we'll take questions also in the chat. You can drop your questions in the chat also.
Absolutely.
And while we're waiting, I'll just have one other question. This seems like a really interesting career path, and I was just kind of interested to see how did you kind of get involved with choosing this career path?
Oh, thanks for asking. So I think it just kind of found me, but I will say that I've always kind of been very comfortable talking about feelings and emotions, and I realized that a lot of people weren't. And so I think, that on top of being in college, I was the Hurricane Katrina freshman class at college, and so really kind of seeing the impact of trauma with children and families and wanting to kind of just have conversations with people who at that time really had lost everything, kind of just set the stepping block for the next thing, so on and so forth. And then it just kind of happens. And then I don't know, I kind of, in a really interesting way, I feel like it's almost like a calling. I think it's a privilege to really be able to be a therapist and sit with people and go into spaces that they probably wouldn't have even told their best friend, and help people work through some really tough moments in life, and be their confidant. And it's a great field. But I definitely started off with psychology. And then I just kind of ended in clinical mental health counseling.
Thank you. So since we don't have any questions right now, we'll just move right along with.
1 second. There's a question.
Oh, sorry.
Is there any other coping mechanisms for imposter syndrome that you know of that'll help people, let's say, for instance, an individual has tried all that you've given. Is there anything that they can do on their own if they can't get a therapist, or, if they don't have someone they feel comfortable enough to talk to or have a soundboard?
Absolutely. I think I'm all about sort of like thought stopping. And I think a lot of times with imposter syndrome, there's a lot of anxiousness that's involved with that. So a lot of anxiety. And a lot of times when we have anxiety, we have a tell, right? So my tell when I get really anxious is that my jaw clenches up and then my back, right? I'm just kind of like, and then sometimes I'll even just like forget to breathe. Like I'll be like, right, and it's like, okay, let me exhale. So I will say that I will definitely pass along to the moderators sort of like some PDFs about just some really helpful mindfulness practices. I'm really a big fan of like belly breathing. So just being very conscious of like how you're breathing, putting your hand over your belly, taking deep breaths in, taking deep breaths out. I also think that mindfulness is really, really, really key. And also meditation is really helpful as well. So how you start your morning, are you starting it on your cell phone? Are you starting it with emails? How can you start that a little bit more peaceful? And I'm all about putting things in place to help you win. So if you find that you're more anxious in the middle of the day, then you might need to take a 15-minute walk. You might need to just get outside. Anything to sort of get you into a new perspective, look at new things, think about something different, and almost kind of trick yourself a little bit. But there's so many different things that you can do. Really anything that decreases anxiousness, the deep breathing, visualization, even getting on YouTube, like listening to music. A lot of the lo-fi playlists are my favorite. Listening to the ocean, anything.
Lovely, lovely. I also had a question, if I can find it. I wrote it down while you were speaking. So I can find my page. So is it possible to identify with more than one of the subtypes that you mentioned? I know you said there was like about 4 or 5 of them. Is it possible that I could sit and have like 2 of them inside of me and, they kind of like conflict with each other?
That's such an academic question to ask. Absolutely. Like, can I be a little bit of a soloist and a little bit of a superwoman? Absolutely. And different, I think life experiences and events will dictate how you respond in those situations as well, right? I know with the superwoman, maybe you're in a situation in a group dynamic that sort of force those feelings out of you, right? And that would be something to look at. If you're in a group that always makes you feel like you're an imposter, is it you? Is it the group that's toxic? Like, do I need to reevaluate myself, or do I need to really evaluate the spaces that I'm in, right? So you can definitely have a little bit of the subtypes. It's not a complete science. I think definitely where you are and who you're interacting with is going to dictate where you fall. That's a good question.
I had a question. Hi, Dr. Dyce.
Hi.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So for those who, I know that you said imposter syndrome can often stem from, family experiences. And speaking for myself, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but oftentimes I was the first person in my family to, get a doctorate or be in the space that I am. So what advice would you give those who are kind of on the stepping stone in their family for, a different career, or, a different, I don't know, going above and beyond, like how can we help those that are underneath us, like our little brothers and our little sisters or cousins, kind of overcome some of those familiar or systemic type of imposter syndrome or anxiety they may experience?
So I think those are kind of two questions. And the first I would say is, before we can like reach back and help somebody, we have to be okay ourselves, right? So we're a product of a family where we feel like I'm the first to do this, right? I'm the first person in my family to have a PhD in like ever. So, and especially like in psychology, my parents are business people in economics. So they were like, what is this? Right? So, and it's a very isolating process. And so I think some of the things that can help navigate that is sort of that self-audit and increasing your self-awareness of who I am and why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing. And then B, finding ways to not necessarily relate on specifics, right? So I don't necessarily have to relate with my parents on the topic of what I do or what they do, but the theme of progression and the theme of growth and the theme of development and who I am is another relatable piece outside of just trying to figure out the specific ways that we can, learn and interact with each other, right? Just to use myself as an example. And I think when we're thinking about, so then once we become okay with who we are, and then when we think about looking back to help the next generation, I think authenticity is one of the biggest pieces that really helps people in situations, being able to be very genuine and transparent about, hey, I went through this, it was rocky. Right? Everyone thinks success looks like this one linear line, when in actuality, it's like a whole bunch of zigzags. And, what do they say? The destination to the top isn't like an elevator, it's like multiple steps. And I think having those real conversations to younger siblings or to friends about what actually, you were experiencing, it's almost like that testimony can help someone else deal with whatever they're dealing with in their particular environment as well. Because a lot of imposter syndrome is almost like what you just said. No one else has ever done it, and no one else has ever had this conversation with me, right? But I'm sure that there's been feelings of inferiority in other spaces. It just hasn't been talked about. And that's kind of where I went back to, like, the whole like reason why I got into mental health and psychology is because no matter if we're cherry pickers or we are working on Wall Street, we all have feelings of not feeling adequate and feeling like the other. And if we can normalize that, then we can bring the connection together versus then feeling like we're in different silos.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question from the chat from Jairus. I hope I said your name correctly. Has the information with imposter syndrome ever came in handy with your personal family or friends?
Absolutely. And I'm not up to it. I sometimes am on the receiving end of having my friends and my circle and my family sometimes have to remind me of who I am. And it's a mutually discussed topic. Especially, going back to the statistics, when you start thinking about Black women, African Americans, when you start thinking about how we represent in these fields of healthcare, STEM, hard scientists, and especially when we start thinking about when we have these licenses and degrees, it's like these systems weren't built for us to be there, right? So when we're here and it's like, how did we get here? And we're looking around and we're kind of like, did everyone figure me out? So this information is definitely in handy, especially with friends that are on the same trajectory in academia, and even sometimes things that are just personal, whether it be feeling like an imposter as a new parent, sometimes feeling like an imposter making a big decision about maybe leaving a relationship that wasn't healthy, or even making a decision I had a conversation with a friend today, and she was just unhappy at her job, and not wanting to make a different decision because she didn't feel capable. So we all have feelings of just self-doubt, and again, I'm a big advocate if we can normalize the conversations like these, which you guys have all signed up to do today, you guys now have become little social agents of change, where now you guys can go back into your circles and normalize something that even just saying it out loud can help someone else feel like, I was thinking that too, and nobody said anything. So it definitely comes in handy.
I have one or two more questions for you. First one is, so how can a parent recognize that their child is dealing with imposter syndrome, and how can they kind of help navigate their child through that?
That's a really good question. Wow. I think for a parent to sort of know when their child is dealing with imposter syndrome, it would probably look differently. So you know what it is when you feel self-doubt, but for a parent, it would primarily be like externalized behavior. So probably hesitation would be a big one, or like over cautiousness about something. Especially if it's, something where, if for instance this kid has had, or this person has had 18 years of dance lessons, and then they get this amazing dance award or recital, and then it's like, I don't belong here, I don't deserve this. So I would definitely, or avoid it. So I would definitely say, look out for behaviors that show isolation. I call them like emotional creep squad. So like isolation, conversations about guilt, conversations about shame, and just feeling like the child just does not belong. When you start to hear a theme of just low, of that disconnect, that would be something that would kind of be a red flag, to have that deeper discussion about whether or not the child felt a sense of belonging. And then the next step would be to really just kind of have a genuine conversation about that and try to get to the root of what that is, right? So a lot of times with feelings, we look at, it's almost like the iceberg effect, right? So we see the tip of the iceberg as like anger or frustration or not wanting to go to something, but then at this under the water, like at the core of it, it's fear, or it's embarrassment, or it's confusion. So it really just is about taking that time to really kind of peel back a lot of those layers and really kind of get to the root of what's going on.
That's beautiful. That was perfect. And the last question I have from someone says, do you believe that medicine should be used to overcome psychological issues?
Absolutely. So I am definitely a practitioner that believes very much so in counseling and talk therapy, but I also believe in the conjunction of psychotropic medication, especially if I'm working with clients that are really depressed or really anxious, or experiencing a lot of mania. It's kind of hard to provide someone homework of like doing deep breathing, or any type of counseling cognitive assignment that I would have for them when we're having trouble breathing, right? Or we're having trouble getting out of bed, or we're having trouble sleeping, right? We know that if we are not able to sleep, then we are just no good, right? So I definitely, and there is no shame, and I am here to say there is no shame in also needing that assistive piece of medication, right? Especially when we start to think about a lot of the feelings like depression and anxiety, our brain is producing a particular chemical to make us feel this particular way, right? So if we need medication, right, like there's that meme that says, if your brain is not producing a particular neurotransmitter, store-bought is fine, right? So if we need a particular neurotransmitter to feel at baseline, to feel okay, to face the day, to implement the skills that we've learned in counseling, then we need to just do that. It's like a vitamin, right? So absolutely.
And I have a question that was sent to me. Is imposter syndrome something you can ever fully get over or through?
Oh, that's a really good question too. I think that we get better, right? I think that it's almost like I'm like quoting everything today, but there's that quote that says, life doesn't get easier, we just get stronger. And I don't think that we ever really can 100% put it away, right? Because the more we advance, the scarier it is, the more thrilling it gets, right? And the more we're just like, wow, can't believe I made it through this. But I think what does change is the time we feel inferior. So something might scare us initially, like in our younger days, right? In like our teens and our 20s, we might dwell on something or feel like we're an imposter for days, weeks, months. But I think as we progress and as we get better at identifying when our inner self-critic is starting to kind of get out of control, we're able to more automatically say, oh, I'm kind of going more towards negative thoughts. I gave it 2 minutes and now I'm ready to move on because I have this new task to do. So I don't think it ever really goes away. And that's kind of what I was saying before. I think some anxiety is good anxiety. It keeps us humble and it keeps us nimble. But I don't think that as we get better and as we get stronger, we just don't dwell as long.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Dyce. We really appreciate your time and your words of wisdom for this event. I know I've picked up a lot and learned a ton. So thank you so much again for sharing your time with us this evening.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you, guys.
So again, we are Let's Get Stimulated. And as you can see in our slide, we have our co-founders, which is myself, Brittany Bush, and my lovely co-founder, Shakayla Nunez. We have our board members shown on the other side, Dr. Alyssa Cobbs, Ms. Ivory Ellis, and Ms. Annette Inty, who was graciously humble enough to introduce our speaker today. So if you want to get in contact with us, we have an email address that's listed here, letsgetstimulated@gmail.com, an Instagram page, and we also have a website. Check it out. We have all of our merchandise on there that Shakayla will be talking about in a little bit. If you wish to donate or want to share our lovely work with anyone, you can use our letsgetstimulated@gmail.com address to send money so that we can add money towards our scholarship fund that we are planning to release very soon to people who are interested, or minorities, should I say, that are interested in pursuing a degree in STEM.
Right. So as Brittany mentioned, Let's Get Stimulated on our website. We do have a store where we sell different merchandise as we are advertising our lovely Let's Get Stimulated t-shirts now, which is available on our website. And all of our proceeds go towards our scholarships for minority students who are interested in pursuing a degree in STEM. We have 2 promotional items that we are showcasing today, which is our 26-ounce custom aluminum water bottle, which is in black. We do have this bottle also in silver. If you would visit the link here for the URL for our store, or just simply go to our website and you can also find the store there. Our second promotional item is our Let's Get Stimulated notebook, which is a really trendy notebook with our logo on it, and for you to take important notes in school or just kind of journal about life, whatever so you desire. So really hope to see you guys either in our emails or visiting our Instagram page. We love to connect with students who would love to be mentored or who might just have any questions about other resources that Let's Get Stimulated has to offer. Go ahead.
So we just want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening and taking time out of your day to spend time with us to learn more about imposter syndrome. I know we all have battled it one time in our life, even if you didn't know it or if you did. So we want to just thank you guys for spending time with us, and I'll hand it over to Shakayla so she can have some closing remarks as well.
I just want to say thank you guys for joining us tonight. Brittany and I truly appreciate all of you taking your time out tonight to be with us. This is just our second event. There's so much more that Let's Get Stimulated has to offer. And please connect with us on Instagram and on LinkedIn. I'm sorry, not LinkedIn. We're getting on LinkedIn soon. On Instagram and on Facebook. I'll just post our contact information here again soon. Our Facebook is Let's Get Stimulated LLC. But if you have an Instagram or if you have access to your email and there's anything that you kind of wanted to hear from us again and we wasn't able to answer any of your questions, or there's something that you feel that we wanted to get across that you may need, please keep in contact with us. And thank you guys so much. And that's it.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Everyone have a nice evening.